It's a quiet evening, and you're playing RuneScape, when a strange character appears out of nowhere. Before you can react, they hand you a puzzle, teleport you into a massive maze, or throw you into a fight for your life. What most players shrugged off as a random annoyance was actually a test. Are you human or not? These were RuneScape's Random Events, Jagex's biggest weapon in the war against bots. Over 40 unique events existed, each using different techniques to separate real players from automated ones. But the war didn't end the way Jagex planned. In the end, the bots won. But how did botters defeat such an advanced system? And why do random events still exist today if they no longer serve any purpose? This is the complete story of RuneScape's Random Events, and the cheaters who defeated them. Our story begins all the way back in early 2001, when RuneScape first launched. From the very beginning, there were players looking to cheat, and back then, cheating in video games was pretty normal. Nearly every game had cheat codes of some form. You could find them in magazines, inside strategy guides from the school book fair, or on websites devoted to them. But RuneScape wasn't like that. It didn't have cheat codes. You couldn't just punch in a button combo or plug in a Game Shark. If you wanted to cheat in RuneScape, you had to build a program that played the game for you, and that's exactly what some players would go on to do. These programs would come to be known as bots. They were designed to mimic a real player's actions, automatically clicking, moving, and interacting with the world without any human input. But when players first started building bots, they weren't all that advanced. The earliest known bots were coordinate bots, which were about as simple as it gets. You'd feed the bot a set of mouse coordinates, like the exact spot where a rock appeared on your screen, or where your inventory icon was, and it would just keep clicking those same points on a loop. With just those coordinates, you could program it to click on a rock 30 times, then move to your inventory and drop all the ore you had just mined. But the bot had no idea what it was actually clicking on. It didn't read the game or react to anything. It just followed a fixed pattern. So if your screen moved, even slightly, or something changed in game, the bot would break instantly. At this point, RuneScape had hundreds of players, but Jagex, the small company behind it, was just 3 people: Andrew, Paul, and Ian Gower. Andrew was the only programmer of the bunch, so it was up to him to figure out how to stop this new bot problem. Luckily, the fix was surprisingly simple. He would update the game so that every so often, the camera would rotate just slightly, usually by just a few pixels. Over time, that tiny movement would add up until the bot's coordinates no longer lined up, and once that happened, the bot would break. Jagex had won their first battle against botting software, but the war was just beginning. As RuneScape grew in popularity, so did the amount of players looking to cheat, and the methods they used to do so would become more and more complex every day. Before long, botters weren't just moving a mouse to fix points on the screen. They were decompiling RuneScape's client and adding their own code directly into it. So Jagex's tools to fight back had to evolve just as quickly, leading to a long game of cat and mouse that would define much of the game's early history. One of Jagex's first major attempts to stay ahead came in late 2002 when they introduced a new mechanic called fatigue. The longer you performed a repetitive task like mining or fishing, the more your fatigue level would rise. Once it hit 100%, your character would stop gaining experience entirely, and the only way to recover back down to 0 was by resting in a bed or using a sleeping bag. But there was a catch. To complete the rest, you had to solve a CAPTCHA style challenge to prove that you were a real player and not a bot. At first, the fatigue system seemed like a really smart way to stop bots for good, but it didn't take long for botters to find a workaround. One bot developer, CAPTCHA, realized that trying to train a program to read and solve CAPTCHAs wasn't worth the effort. Jagex could just change the fonts and break everything. So instead, he built a pair of programs called Sleepwalker and Fatigue Operator. When a bot went to sleep in-game, Sleepwalker would upload the CAPTCHA to Fatigue Operator, where real people would solve it in exchange for points that they could use later to get their bot's CAPTCHA solved. It turned botting into a sort of group project. You help me and I'll help you. And just like that, the CAPTCHA system meant to stop automation was no longer much of an issue for botters. Just solve others' CAPTCHAs for 15 minutes before work or school, and you'll earn enough points to keep your bot running all day. This would lead to fatigue becoming ineffective against most major bots, and a major annoyance to legitimate players. But for now, it was the best system they had. Most of Jagex's development time during this period was focused on RuneScape 2. RuneScape 2 was a complete overhaul of the game, with new graphics, new mechanics, and an entirely new engine under the hood. When the public beta launched on December 1st, 2003, it broke nearly every bot in existence overnight. They just didn't work with the new version of the game. The only bot that didn't completely break was called Scar, another project by CAPTCHA. Unlike most bots of the time, Scar wasn't tied to RuneScape's code. It was what's known as a color bot. It scanned the screen for certain colors, and when it found them, it clicked. For example, you could tell it the exact shade of green that Flax appeared as, and whenever it detected that color on screen, it would click it to pick it up. What really made Scar special though was its ability to recognize text. Trees in RuneScape Classic shared very similar colors with the surrounding terrain, so color alone wasn't reliable. Scar scripts solved this by moving the mouse around until the game displayed the word chop in the top left corner. That way, the bot knew it was hovering over a tree and not a random patch of grass. On top of this, Scar supported both minimap and image recognition, allowing it to identify shapes and icons rather than just raw colors. When RuneScape 2 launched, getting Scar working again was much easier than any of the other bots, because it didn't rely on RuneScape's internal code. Things like minimap, text, and image recognition would need to be fixed, but the core idea of finding a color and clicking on it wasn't broken. But most cheaters still had their sights set on the original RuneScape. With RuneScape 2 still in beta, investing time into fixing Scar for it didn't make much sense. Jagex could change, add, or remove anything at any moment, breaking their work all over again, such as the fatigue system. Anyone who plays RuneScape today knows that there's no fatigue anymore, but during the early weeks of the beta, it was still there, but it's unknown if it was ever fully implemented. There are screenshots that show players with increased fatigue, sleeping bags, and even chat messages that display that resting was possible, and animations for resting have also been found in beta cache files. But there was something wrong with fatigue. In an internal report from December 20th, 2003, the first thing on Andrew Gower's to-do list was sort out fatigue system, and then in parentheses, scrap ? If I had to guess, the team had implemented everything related to fatigue except the CAPTCHA system. It's the one major fatigue feature that we don't have any screenshots of from the beta. Andrew was likely considering scrapping the system entirely since it had been deeply unpopular in the original version of RuneScape. Ultimately, fatigue would be removed from the beta not long after this, as the team came up with a much better and more engaging bot deterrent called Random Events. Jagex didn't know it yet, but the introduction of Random Events would mark the start of one of their longest battles in RuneScape history. A battle that would involve a drunk late-night emergency rollback, a cafeteria worker turned into an icon, unsolvable puzzle glitches, and much more. But before we get to that, I have a random event of sorts to offer you. This one's not from the genie or the sandwich lady, but today's sponsor, Adam and Eve. Whether you're going through life solo, have a duo partner, or trying to fill out your relationship collection log, they've got a wide variety of adult products to keep things fun. From romantic must-haves to solo power-ups, they've got just about anything you could want, and plenty that you never knew existed. They even make great gifts if you're looking to treat someone special. They've been in the business for over 50 years, have discreet packaging, 24/7 customer support, and 90-day no-hassle returns, so you can shop confidently. Click the link in the description or head on over to Adam and Eve and use code Colonello to get 50% off your first item, free shipping in the US and Canada, and free rush processing. That's adamandeve.com, code Colonello. While playing RuneScape, depending on the activity you were doing, there was now a chance that a random event would appear. To continue what you were doing, you'd have to solve the event in some way, and in return, you'd sometimes receive a small reward for your time. On February 2nd, 2004, the first batch of random events were added to the RuneScape 2 beta. No one knew it yet, but these strange encounters would soon become a core part of RuneScape's identity. First up was the mysterious old man. He'd randomly appear, and if you talked to him, he'd hand you a random item. That was it. So how did giving players a free item actually help stop bots? Well, if you ignored him, he'd teleport you somewhere random in RuneScape. And when he was first introduced, no bot scripts accounted for that. They wouldn't talk to him, get teleported miles away, and their script would break because they'd have no idea where they were. The Genie was another similar event. He would appear and give you some XP in any skill of your choosing if you spoke to him, or would teleport you far away if ignored. Numerous fan sites at the time also claimed that if ignored, the Genie would scatter your inventory across the ground instead of teleporting you away, but if this feature existed at all is highly debated by the community. When I asked Mod Ash about it, he said he didn't recall any version that worked that way, though RuneScape 2 launched just a few months before he joined Jagex. The earliest version of the Genie's punishment code he could find in any archive used the label Macro Genie Angry Teleport, which was clearly written to move the player and mentioned nothing about scattering their items. So, assuming that the inventory spreading rumor was just a rumor, the punishment for ignoring the Genie was relatively harmless for real players, just a mild inconvenience. But not every random event was so harmless. Some were far more aggressive. These were known as Guardian randoms, hostile NPCs that would spawn while you trained certain skills and attack only the player who triggered them. They all scaled with your combat level and had to be killed or ran from until they despawned. While woodcutting, a tree spirit could appear. While fishing, a river troll might show up. While burying bones, you could be interrupted by a shade or zombie. During thieving, it was the Watchman. And while mining, the infamous rock golem would pop up. These events were effective. Skilling bots weren't programmed to fight back or know to run away, so many of them would just die. Other events focus less on combat and more on punishment for not paying attention. For example, while chopping trees, you might click on one that suddenly turned into an ent. If you kept chopping, your axe would break, and you'd have to visit Bob's Brilliant Axes in Lumbridge to get it repaired. Your axe head could also randomly fly off while woodcutting, landing a few tiles away. You'd need to pick it up and reattach it before you could continue chopping. If you didn't notice or were too slow to react, it could be an expensive mistake, especially after the release of the Dragon Axe a few years later. Its head could fly off just like any other axe, and at the time, that axe was worth millions of gold. If you didn't pick up the axe head, it would despawn or another player could grab it. A whirlpool would sometimes appear on top of a fishing spot and swallow your equipment if you kept fishing there, or a big fish could eat your gear and spit it out a few tiles away. Harmless if you noticed, but many players got their gear stolen by someone else if they didn't react fast enough. While mining, the rock could sometimes begin to smoke. If you continued mining it, it would explode, damaging your character and your pickaxe. You'd need to get your pickaxe repaired by Nermorph in the Dwarven mines to continue mining. Just like with woodcutting, your pickaxe head could also randomly fly off and would need to be picked up and reattached. While thieving from chests, a poison gas cloud would sometimes come out and damage you and any nearby players. Despite the damage hit splat being green, it wouldn't actually poison you. This one was pretty much unavoidable, so I think it was made so that players couldn't just auto-click the same chest over and over again, and would need to heal up with food on occasion. Sometimes while training, a strange plant would begin to grow beside you. After a moment, you could pick it to receive a strange fruit, an item that could be eaten to cure poison and restore your run energy by 30%. However, if you ignored the plant, it would attack you and actually had a chance to poison you, unlike the poison cloud for some reason. Lastly, we have the Swarm, a very weak swarm of bugs that would attack you while training. On release, you could fight back, but you'd hit very low numbers, so eventually they just removed the ability to fight back overall. Otherwise, all you could do was run away from it. There were also a few random events that never made it past the planning stage, ones we only know about thanks to the RuneScape Archive project, which preserves old game files and data. One of them was the Savage Bird, believed to have been similar to the Swarm event. Its examine text simply read, "This bird isn't happy." Although it existed in the game's files, it was never added to the live game, and the reason why remains unknown. Another one was the Brownie, a tiny brown imp that would appear, steal an item from you, and then vanish. It seems to have been scrapped in very early development, as it never received an examine text or even right-click options. Altogether, the events that did release gave botters a lot to deal with all at once. By the time RuneScape 2's beta ended and the full game launched, Scar was only just starting to work again. Not only did botters have to wrestle with getting Scar stable, they now had to figure out how to handle random events too. Each one worked differently, and since players might not encounter the same event again for days at a time, it took a lot of trial and error to even begin automating them. In the beginning, bots were getting killed and teleported left and right, but over time, slowly but surely, they would begin to write scripts that could recognize these events and avoid or complete them. But then, Jagex threw a little curveball. 2 months after the original batch of random events, they launched 2 more. One of them was a hit, and the other was a disaster. Let's start with the good one first, the Drunken Dwarf. During your adventures through RuneScape, a Drunken Dwarf would now occasionally appear. If you talked to him, he'd give you a kebab and a beer. If you ignored him, he would attack you. Now for the bad event. It's one that you've likely never heard of, as it was only in the game for about 3 hours before it was removed. The tanglevine. It would sprout under your feet and trap you. If you moved or clicked on your screen at all, you would take damage. If you instead did nothing for 10 seconds, the vines would disappear and you could move again. The idea behind it was actually pretty clever. Bots are pre-programmed to move around and do certain things. Jagex figured that bots wouldn't recognize the vine and they'd just keep following their script, clicking away until they eventually died. But for real players, the instinct was completely different. When something unexpected pops up on your screen, your first reaction is usually to move, to get away from it. And in doing so, you'd trigger the punishment. You might click once, take damage, and panic, thinking that the vines are killing you because you're standing on them. So you click faster and faster to try and get away, and then you're dead. To add on to this, the vine didn't check if there was any scenery on the ground near you when spawning. It would replace whatever was nearby, and when it despawned, whatever was there before wouldn't come back. It was deleting chunks of the map which wouldn't come back unless Jagex restarted the game server. Jagex had pushed the update live right at the end of the workday, so by the time players started encountering the tanglevine, most of the staff were already down at the pub. They were casually keeping an eye on the forum from their phones, and it didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. The vine was hurting real players far more than it was hurting bots. By that point, a few drinks had been had, but despite that, Andrew Gower decided to head back to the office and fix it himself. Something he'd already done more than once after a late night at the pub. He got back to the office, removed the tanglevine from the game, and posted on the forums that it had been fixed. The post has since, unfortunately, been lost to time, but according to former Jagex staff, it was a little hard to read, thanks to those earlier drinks at the pub. After the Drunken Dwarf and the short-lived tanglevine, Jagex seemed to take a break from adding new random events. But 4 months later, in late 2004, they returned with a rework of the Mysterious Old Man. Instead of simply handing out a free item, he could now trigger one of 3 possible events, one of which would become one of the most complex and difficult random events in the game. The first new event was the Mime Show. The Mysterious Old Man would teleport you to a stage where a mime performed a short routine. Your job was to copy his emotes exactly. If you got it right, you'd be rewarded with a gift and sent back to where you were. But if you messed up or didn't pay attention, you'd be teleported somewhere random with nothing to show for it. What really made the Mime Show stand out though were its exclusive rewards. You could unlock parts of the Mime outfit, along with unique emotes that quickly had other players asking, where did you get those? If you already had everything unlocked, you'd receive 500 coins for completing the event. The second new event was the Strange Box. The Mysterious Old Man would appear and place a puzzle box in your inventory. You had to stop what you were doing and solve it. If you ignored it or answered incorrectly, the box would start duplicating itself, eventually filling your entire inventory and stacking endlessly. It couldn't be dropped, traded, or banked. Your only real options were to solve it or die with it in your inventory so it went away. The final event was the Maze, by far the most ambitious random event Jagex had created up to that point. The Mysterious Old Man would appear and teleport you into a massive labyrinth made up of floating cubes. Your goal was to make it to the center of the maze and click the Strange Shrine. That would complete the event, and you'd be rewarded much better than most other random events. You could also come across chests in the maze filled with additional rewards. However, you were on a strict timer. The The longer you took to reach the shrine, the fewer rewards you received. For real players, it was intense, part obstacle course, part race against the clock. For bots, it was an absolute nightmare. It was near impossible to write a script for it. For many years after the maze's release, bots just couldn't solve it. If they were given the event, they would just log out and wait for the bot's owner to come solve it for them. This event was a big win for Jagex, and they were ahead of the botters, for now. To try and keep this edge, they would add over a dozen new random events through 2005. Some would go on to become even more iconic than those in the first batch, while others, much like the tanglevine, were so broken they'd be removed not long after their introduction. First up is Captain Hand, a pirate who could appear while you were doing just about anything. If you spoke to him, he'd give you a reward and be on his way, but if you ignored him, he'd attack you with his very accurate crossbow. Another pirate named Captain Arnov would release the same year. He was tied specifically to the then newly released farming skill. He'd appear at a farming patch and claim it was the exact spot where he'd buried a treasure chest long ago. Your job was to solve the combination lock on the chest. If you got it right, you'd earn a reward, but if you failed or ignored him, you'd get hit over the head with a bottle and teleported to a random location. This wasn't the only farming related random event added with the skill. Just like with woodcutting and mining's tools, your rake and spade could fall apart mid-use. Their heads would fly off and you'd need to retrieve and reattach them before continuing. Another event similar to Captain Arnov was Rick Turpentine. He was a former highwayman who would appear and offer you a free item, but if ignored, would attack you. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was another new random in the same vein. Dr. Jekyll would appear and ask the player for an herb he needed to finish his potion. In return, you'd get a random potion. If you didn't want to give him an herb or didn't have one, he would just give you a free half-full strength potion and be on his way. But if you ignored him entirely, he would turn into Mr. Hyde and begin attacking you. This event was actually one of my favorites because it's based on Robert Louis Stevenson's gothic horror novella, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Written in 1886, the story was well into the public domain by 2005, meaning Jagex could just drop the characters right into RuneScape without consequence. A gothic classic, reimagined as man asks for weed, gets violent when ignored. This wasn't the only doctor-related random event added that year. Players would also get to meet Dr. Ford. Occasionally, while woodcutting or mining, you'd get hit in the head by a wood chunk or stone. Dr. Ford would appear and ask you to identify how many fingers he's holding up. If you identified it correctly, you'd be given a reward, and this reward actually had a 1 in 100 chance of being a lollipop. If you identified the wrong one, you'd be sent to the Varrock Church to rest. There were rumors that occasionally Dr. Ford would flash you the middle finger on the identification screen, but upon inspection of the game's cache, that was found to be impossible. Instead, players likely mistook this option where he lifts his middle and ring finger as a middle finger. Can you imagine that though? You've just been whacked in the head by a piece of wood or a rock, and the doctor who's supposed to help you runs over and goes, "Hey buddy, how many fingers am I holding up?" Now, Dr. Ford is unlike a lot of other randoms released in 2005, because he was only in the game for a little over 3 months. The likely reason for this is because there was a bug where even if you answered correctly, you'd be teleported away. There was a rework planned where, upon failing, he would teleport you to his hospital, but it was scrapped before completion for unknown reasons. The developer probably ran out of time, and rather than fix the event, it was easier to just remove it. Dr. Ford also wasn't the only random event that asked players to identify something. Around the same time, Niles, Giles, and Miles were introduced, a nod to the old Surters from the original RuneScape. In the original RuneScape, Surters were NPCs who could convert your items into certificates, basically an early version of banknotes. They were phased out in RuneScape 2 when banknotes were added to the game, but these 3 characters were brought back as a random event. When they appeared, they'd show you an item and ask you to identify it correctly from a list. If you answered right, you'd get a small reward. If you ignored them or answered incorrectly, you'd be teleported to a random location, and as a fun twist, all of your inventory items would be converted into banknotes. This was one of the more frustrating random events, especially during combat, and would inspire a player to create this pretty iconic comic about it that you might have seen if you played back then. Oddly enough, there was yet another identify this object type event added this year. While training, you'd be whisked away by the mysterious old man to participate in a game show called Odd One Out, hosted by the Quizmaster. You'd have to identify an item that didn't fit with the rest. Now, unlike other random events, this one was impossible to fail. The Quizmaster would keep asking questions until you got 4 in a row correct. Upon completion, you'd be given the choice of either 1,000 coins or a mystery box as a reward. It was almost always more worth it to take the 1,000 coins, but you could get some surprising rewards from the box.
You have a choice. You can have the boat or the mystery box.
What, are you crazy? We'll take the boat.
No, not so fast, Lois. A boat's a boat, but the mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat. You know how much we've wanted one of those.
Then let's just...
We'll take the box.
The Pillory Guard random event had players identify not items, but shapes. While thieving, he could appear and whisk you away, locking you inside a pillory cage somewhere in RuneScape. To escape, you had to open 3 locks by choosing the key whose shape matched the one on the lock. And while you were trapped inside, nearby players could even throw tomatoes at you for a little added humiliation. But if you completed the event successfully, you'd get a small reward for the time you served. Kiss the Frog was probably one of the more unique events added in 2005. A group of frogs would appear and direct you to kiss either the Frog Prince or Frog Princess. After doing so, they'd turn into a human and reward you with a frog token. You could then take the token to Thessalia's fine clothes shop in Varrock and use it to purchase parts of the royal frog outfit or the frog mask. If you ignored the frogs, you would be teleported to Frogland and be turned into a frog, where you would have to beg for forgiveness to be changed back and return to RuneScape. Evil Bob's Island was another silly one with a pretty interesting backstory. In 2004, a cat NPC simply named Cat was added to roam around Burthorpe as part of the Death Plateau quest. The artist who designed the cat gave it the maximum possible wander distance for an NPC just to see how far it could go. Players soon began spotting the cat in places it was never meant to be. Edgeville, Portsarim, Lumbridge, pretty much anywhere that wasn't blocked off by walls or terrain. It became an accidental icon, and players even began to theorize that this cat was a J-mod in disguise spying on players. Soon after this, the cat would be renamed to Bob, allegedly based on Jagex moderator Mod Mark's real-life cat. But who is Evil Bob? He was a random event NPC who could appear while you were training fishing or magic. And when you spoke to him, he would kidnap you and take you to his private island. His island isn't located in RuneScape, but Scape Rune, where everything is backwards. You'd have to fish for some cooked fish, and then uncook it on the uncooking pot. You would then feed the fish to Evil Bob, he would fall asleep, and you could escape. You can really tell that the Jagex team was starting to have a lot of fun with designing these random events. The Evil Chicken was also added in 2005, and was a new Guardian random that could appear while training any skill. It would appear and begin attacking you until you either ran far enough away or killed it. Another fun one was the Drill Demon event. A demon named Sergeant Damien would suddenly appear and draft you into his military training camp. Once there, you'd be ordered to perform a series of exercises on 4 different mats. After completing 4 exercises in a row correctly, you were free to leave. In return for your service, you'd earn a piece of the camo outfit, which back then actually looked a lot different than the modern version. It looks a little goofy, but I have to say I like it a lot better. Now, if you already had the full set, you'd just be given 500 coins. The Freaky Forester was another interesting new one. He would teleport you to a small clearing in a forest, where you would have to kill a pheasant with a specific number of tails and return it to him. For successfully completing the event, you would receive a pair of the Lederhosen outfit, outfit, or 500 coins if you already own the full set. I don't know about you, but I specifically remember this rumor from back in the day that wearing the Lederhosen outfit was actually a way to get more woodcutting XP or something along those lines. It was before they had the XP drops in the top right corner, so of course I just blindly believe it rather than hovering my mouse over the woodcutting icon to check. But if you heard that too and were wondering if I'd mentioned that, it was indeed just a rumor. The final event from 2005 that I haven't discussed yet was the Lost and Found event. While teleporting somewhere, you might occasionally find yourself stuck in a small room within the abyss. There was a problem with your teleport spell, so you'd need to pull the right lever to continue your teleport and make it to your final destination, after which you'd receive some runes or essence as compensation. As you can imagine, all of these random events were a big problem for botters. It was difficult, if not impossible, to keep up with all of them, but at the end of 2005, the botting community would receive a major lifeline. A new and very impressive bot called Aryan would be released. Let's talk about that name first though. It sounded bad enough that the developers actually had to post a disclaimer on their website clarifying that it wasn't a reference to, you know, that Aryan. They insisted that they use the term to mean better or noble, which honestly doesn't make it sound much better, but oh well. Anyway, Aryan was unlike anything the botting community had ever seen before. It was open source, had a team of developers behind it, and unlike Scar, you could run as many instances of it as you wanted. Scar needed full control of your mouse to operate, meaning you could only run one bot account at a time. Aryan did not. You might remember those more advanced RuneScape bots I mentioned earlier, the ones that stopped working when RuneScape 2 launched because they relied on decompiling the RuneScape client's code. Aryan worked similarly to how they did, but for RuneScape 2. Rather than detecting colors on screen and clicking on them, it essentially worked by reverse engineering RuneScape's client. It decompiled RuneScape's client, turning it into code that Aryan's developers could read. From there, they could add their own code and recompile the client. Instead of hunting for the colors of trees and rocks on the screen and clicking them, Aryan's developers modified the client, so botters could just write a line in their scripts like mine rock or talk to banker, and the bot would just carry out the action directly. To give you an idea of how respected this bot was, many bots that followed it in later years would claim to be the best bot since Aryan, or even Aryan 2. Although Aryan was much easier for Jagex to detect than other bots like Scar, it was much more reliable at solving random events. By the start of 2006, they had every single one solved, except for the maze. The botting community was entering a new golden era, and botters felt unstoppable. But just a few weeks later, the project would shut down. Although the exact reason has been lost to time, it's believed that Jagex threatened Aryan's developers with a lawsuit if they didn't cease operations. So Aryan's team would disband, and the official fork of it would be taken offline. But due to its open source nature, tons of spin-offs would pop up. Much like a Hydra, Jagex had only chopped off one head, and in its place, several more began to grow. It was only a matter of time before one of the new forks became as popular as the original. So Jagex went back to the drawing board and got to work on more random events. The first new random event of 2006 was the iconic Sandwich Lady. She would randomly appear and offer you a treat from her tray. If you picked the wrong one or took too long to talk to her, she would hit you over the head with a baguette and teleport you to a random area. The Sandwich Lady's backstory is actually super interesting. She's based off of a real person. The office building Jagex was in at the time was shared with multiple businesses. This building had a canteen with a sandwich lady who would go around to all the businesses, knock on their doors, and announce herself by saying, "Sandwiches!" She was a real-life random event who interrupted work, so they added her to the game to do the same to players. If a Jagex staff member asked the real sandwich lady for a food item that she didn't have at the time, she'd knock them out with a piece of bread and they'd wind up in a parking lot somewhere in Cambridge. Okay, so not actually, but she would give them a pretty mean look. The character's hair, outfit, everything was inspired by the real sandwich lady. Someone even let her know that they added her to RuneScape, and she didn't seem to mind. Honestly, she probably had no idea what they were talking about. The next new random event was Prison Pete. An NPC named Pete had been imprisoned by Evil Bob in Scape Rune. You'd need to help him escape by popping balloon animals to get prison keys. After popping the correct animal 3 times in a row and turning in the keys, you were free to go. Prison Pete seems to be the Scape Rune version of Party Pete, given that the jail area looks exactly like the Falador party room, and in both areas, you're popping balloons. Jagex really had a thing for repeating names in random events, because not long after Prison Pete's introduction, another random event NPC named Pious Pete appeared. Much like the Tanglevine and Dr. Ford events, Pious Pete wasn't around for long, only a few months before being quietly removed. In this event, you would be teleported to Pete's chapel, where you had to help relight its candles. It sounds simple enough, but the execution was brutal. The instructions were vague, and the candles would constantly go out before you could finish, forcing you to start over again and again. You could only leave if you successfully completed what he asked. Some reported spending hours trying to complete it, only to earn a few hundred coins as a reward when they finally did. Overall, it was a really confusing event, so I'm not surprised that it was removed pretty quickly. After the 2 Petes came the introduction of the Gravedigger random event. While burying bones, there was a chance that a gravedigger named Leo would appear. You'd be teleported to a small cemetery with 5 open grave sites, each of which had a coffin and headstone, but all the coffins are matched up to the wrong headstones, so you'd need to remove each coffin and match them to their proper headstone. In return, you'd receive a piece of the zombie outfit, or a zombie-themed emote. This thriller-themed emote went so crazy in RuneScape music videos back in the day. Like the other random events that rewarded emotes or outfits, players who already had all the rewards would instead receive 500 coins. 2006 also had 2 more random events that were never released. The first one was titled Speedy Gnome. In this event, you would compete against Sebastian No, the fastest gnome in the world, in an agility course. It sounds fun, so why was it never released? The event was fully developed, complete with dialogue, animations, and graphics. It even passed internal testing and was just hours away from a full release. But then, at the last minute, Mod Ash noticed something. The agility course was exactly the same every time. It didn't actually stop bots. In fact, a bot could run the full course faster and better than a real human could. So the event was scrapped right before launch. If it would have made it into the full game, it would have actually changed RuneScape's history in a small but fascinating way. Completing this event would have rewarded you with racing sandals, a pair of boots that give a +3 strength bonus, making them the best in slot at the time. In 2006, everyone would have been running around in sandals rather than rune boots. Next, we have the Duke of Bridgelum random event. In this one, you would be transported to Scape Rune and would have to help the Duke of Bridgelum reassemble dead cows. This one only ever made it to testing where it was scrapped, because quite frankly, it's gross. The reward for this event was going to be the cow outfit, but it would later be repurposed in old school RuneScape as a reward for completing its annual birthday event. But forget I even mentioned old school RuneScape, because at this point in the story, we're still a few years away from that version of the game launching. Now, even after throwing a small army of new random events at botters, they soon got to work solving them. They were able to figure out how to automate these new events faster than ever before, so Jagex would have to step things up. Perhaps you're familiar with the Bot Nuke Day, also known as Cluster Flutterer, the massive 2011 update that wiped out millions of bots overnight by making changes to the game's code. But what most players don't know is that this wasn't Jagex's first attempt at something like this. Back in 2006, they were developing a secret project known internally as Java Flutterer. The update scrambled, encrypted, and obfuscated most of RuneScape's client code, so bot programs and decompilers couldn't make sense of it anymore. Imagine Aryan was using a neatly labeled map of RuneScape's client. Java Flutterer scrambled the labels and erased the symbols. The game still ran perfectly for players, but for Aryan, the map became unreadable overnight. This update broke Aryan seemingly for good, and now, once again, the only real bot left was Scar. While Aryan had the spotlight for a long time, in the shadows, Scar users had kept improving their scripts. What started as a handful of hobbyists tinkering in isolation gradually evolved into a large organized community. Scripters began sharing reusable chunks of code called includes, shared libraries filled with pre-written helper functions for things like mouse movement, pathfinding, and random event solving. This collaboration soon turned competitive, sparking what became known as the Include Wars, a race between developers to create the smartest, most human-like libraries. Each new release was faster, smoother, and more reliable than the last, pushing Scar to its limits. But out of that chaos came something remarkable: SRL. Short for Scar RuneScape Library. The SRL project was built to end the constant competition and bring order to the community. Instead of dozens of separate includes maintained by different developers, SRL aimed to unify everything into a single, standardized framework that everyone could use. It combined the best features of all the major includes of the time, along with new contributions from some of the most talented bot developers in the scene. The result was an enormous toolkit that could handle almost everything a bot needed to do, from navigating the world and managing inventory to detecting colors, solving puzzles, and most importantly for this story, completing random events all on its own. With Aryan gone, Jagex's main focus now became stopping SRL. SRL was good at solving random events, but it wasn't perfect. So Jagex's best line of defense was to add more random events. In the months that followed, they introduced what would become the final wave of random events, aside from one outlier that wouldn't appear until 16 years later. But more on that in a bit. First up was the Pinball random event. Players would be teleported to a strange arena by a troll named Flippa. Inside were 5 pillars, and the goal was simple: tag the one surrounded by glowing rings to earn points. After scoring 10 points, you could leave with your reward, but if you hit the wrong pillar, your score reset to 0, forcing you to start over. Next came the Evil Twin random event. Posty Pete would teleport you to this room at the request of an NPC named Molly. She tells you that her twin sister has been committing crimes around RuneScape that she has been blamed for. It's up to you to identify the sister and pick her up with a giant claw, which would place her in a cage. If you fail to identify the right twin, you're teleported to a random area in RuneScape. A few months after those events, we got the Beekeeper random event. While picking flax, the Beekeeper could appear and ask for your help fixing a broken beehive. After assembling it, you'd be given a random gift and returned to the flax fields. If you failed, bees would escape from the hive, begin attacking you, and you'd be teleported to a body of water near Sears Village. The same day that the Beekeeper random was added, we would also get the Security Guard. His job was simply to remind players to set account security questions and give them a random gift. If you ignored him, he would attack you. This event wasn't really intended to help stop bots, but to instead help regular players keep their account secure. The final event was called Surprise Exam. The mysterious old man would teleport you to a classroom of a dragon named Mr. Mordot. After answering 3 questions correctly, you would be given a book of knowledge, which, when read, would award you with XP and a skill of your choosing. This would mark RuneScape's final random event for over a decade. But why? Although Jagex never gave an official reason for why they stopped adding new random events, it's likely because bots more advanced than both the now broken Aryan and SRL were on the rise. Most notably, a bot called iBot, also known as Nexus. Without going too far into the weeds, iBot and other new bots like it took very different approaches from Aryan to accomplish the same goal. Instead of decompiling, modifying, and recompiling the client, these bots either slipped their code into it while it was running, or used the client's own systems to read what was happening in real time. That made them far tougher to break with Jagex's usual code changes, and random events were basically useless against them. iBot could not only solve every random event in the game, Jagex would have a much harder time breaking it. Random events became just one tool in Jagex's wider arsenal, aimed at breaking certain types of bots. Think of the rotating camera mechanic first added back in RuneScape 1. It didn't do much against color bots, but it completely broke coordinate-based bots. In the same way, random events weren't effective against these new advanced bots, but they were a simple and reliable way to disrupt color bots. As the late 2000s progressed, more and more advanced bots started to pop up. You may recognize names like RSBot and RSBuddy. Much like iBot, most had little to no issue solving every random event in the game. It wasn't long before, much like fatigue, random events were no longer a deterrent to botters, and instead just an annoyance to genuine players. So in February of 2009, they would be given a significant overhaul. First of all, the majority of the game's random events would be removed entirely. Jagex removed every random event that could break your tools, hurt you, or attack you if you didn't respond. The strange box was also removed for being, frankly, just annoying. Meanwhile, events that teleported you somewhere else, like the Drill Demon, Freaky Forester, and Quizmaster, were kept. Others, such as the Surters, Sandwich Lady, and Captain Arnov, were reworked, so that instead of interrupting you on the spot, they'd teleport you away to complete their events. The reason being that bots seem to get confused by events that would teleport them to an instanced area. Sometimes they'd have trouble working out where they were. So Jagex, in one update, could make events less annoying and slightly beef up their usefulness against bots. Random events that were once exclusive to certain activities, like Captain Arnov while farming, and the Beekeeper while picking flax, would also no longer be locked to those activities. You could now encounter them while doing just about anything. This update also came with a rewrite of what random events could reward. Instead of receiving a random item, you'd receive a random event gift box, where you could choose your reward. But what about all the unique rewards, like the emotes from the Gravedigger, or the Mime outfit from the Mime show? Well, if you did those events, your reward box would be a little different. You still had some of the average rewards, but you could also redeem your box for emotes or a costume point. Once you had enough costume points, you could redeem them for costume pieces with Iffy and Thessalia's Fine Clothes Shop. Despite the remaining events no longer being dangerous, they were still an annoyance to legitimate players. As the years went by, color bots began to lose a huge amount of their market share to more advanced bots. By 2011, they only made up 2% of all the bots in the game. It was around this time that Jagex would launch their biggest anti-bot update yet, Bot Nuke Day, also known as Cluster Flutterer, a massive update that completely scrambled previously unobfuscated parts of RuneScape's client code. Every bot that relied on reading or modifying the client suddenly stopped working overnight. To make things even harder, Jagex began releasing slightly different versions of the client for each player, making it nearly impossible for bot developers to keep up. In the days that followed, they banned millions of bots, on a scale never seen before. They claimed that these bots made up about 40% of the player base at the time. It was one of Jagex's most successful anti-bot operations to date. But this massive ban wave didn't suddenly make color bots the top dogs again. When Aryan and its spin-offs were shut down years earlier, players briefly fell back on color bots, but this time was different. The bots Jagex had just taken down weren't small projects. They had huge communities behind them, and some of their developers were making tens of thousands of dollars a month from paid subscriptions and scripts. So it didn't take long before they found ways to adapt and get around the changes Jagex had made. Jagex would soon begin taking a different route to shut these bots down, taking them to court. They couldn't get all of them, but they had success taking numerous bot makers to court and shutting their projects down entirely. By now, random events weren't really relevant anymore. Jagex was focused on much bigger fish than the 2% of players using color bots. Random events did little in the war on bots anymore, and were an ever-growing annoyance for legitimate players. So in October of 2012, Jagex decided it was time to remove random events from the game entirely. But now there would be no way to obtain the exclusive rewards that random events offered, unless you had enough costume points saved up. So a few months later, in February of 2013, Jagex would make it so players could purchase any of the random event costume pieces from Iffy's costume shop in Varrock using coins. Purchasing any of the Mime or Gravedigger pieces would also unlock their related emotes. All of the old NPCs that you know and love from these events would also be given permanent homes around the game world. But random events weren't gone for good. Old school RuneScape launched that same month, bringing with it the random events exactly as players remembered them from 2007. Aggressive, non-aggressive, everything. They were all back. They were fun at first and deterred some basic bots, but as the months went by, players once again found themselves becoming very annoyed with them. By now, many players' playstyles were much different than when they were kids. Many of them preferred to play RuneScape while doing other things away from their computer. If they got a random event, they'd solve it when they got back, but that wasn't possible in old school RuneScape, as you'd often come back dead thanks to an aggressive random event. Or even if you were at your computer, giving the game your full focus, your flow state would be broken when some lady asked you to identify a bread roll. Many players who encountered the more frustrating or lengthy randoms would just log out and go play something else. But the small team developing old school felt that they couldn't just outright remove them for a number of reasons. First of all, the game is called old school RuneScape. They couldn't just outright remove one of the most old school things about it just because some players found it annoying. They also didn't know how they would implement new ways to get the rewards that players could only get from randoms. And some players even argued that the vast majority of gems in the game came from random events, which gave them out frequently as a reward, but more on that in a moment. It took a while, but the team finally came up with a simple but effective solution. Remove the aggressive random events that were killing everyone, remove the tool-breaking randoms, and make all the other ones optional. If you don't reply to them, instead of teleporting you somewhere random, they just go away. Boom! No need to rework how players get the event exclusive rewards because only non-aggressive randoms gave them, and anyone who still wants their easy free gems can get them. Even if the idea that they introduced the vast majority of the game's gems was very likely exaggerated. Gem rocks not only existed back then, but were one of the best mining training methods in the game, if you had the right gear. However, they weren't on the wiki's 99 mining guide at the time, so most players just had no idea. I wanted to mention this because it was genuinely shocking how many Reddit posts I came across claiming old school's gem economy would just collapse if random events were removed. On August 28, 2014, Jagex would poll if random events should become optional, and it would unsurprisingly pass with flying colors. Jagex would then implement the change on September 11th. Along with making them optional, the events that were once activity-specific could once again be encountered anywhere. Much like with the original version of RuneScape, all the discontinued randoms would also be placed around the game world, where you can still visit them today. But that's not quite where the story ends. Over the next few years, Jagex would make a number of small tweaks to all the random events that remained, such as adding an option to dismiss them once they appeared, so you didn't have to sit through them screaming and trying to get your attention. Many punishments for failing events would be removed, and they would also adjust a few random events so you could just leave them early if you got stuck or bored. But perhaps the best change of all was the introduction of the stale baguette, a fun weapon available only from the Quizmaster's mystery box or as a 1 in 64 reward when the sandwich lady offers you a baguette. I ignore most random events these days, but I will always make time to complete a Quizmaster or Sandwich Lady one, because there's nothing RuneScape players like myself love more than useless collectible items. But perhaps what you've been waiting for, on November 1st, 2023, Jagex introduced what is, at least for now, the game's final random event to old school RuneScape, and his name is CAPTCHA. He's a vampire who appears to make sure your account is secure, checking if you've set a bank pin and upgraded from the old login system to a Jagex account. If you have, he rewards you with an experience lamp. Although random events no longer exist in the original version of RuneScape and have lost much of their purpose in old school, they're still a core part of RuneScape's DNA. What began as a creative weapon in the war against bots ended up becoming one of the most nostalgic features in the game's history. Something that we once found annoying that now holds a special place in our memories. A reminder of when RuneScape still felt mysterious, unpredictable, and full of secrets waiting to be found. I've been talking for a long time, so I'm gonna go. But you should check out the video on the right. It's a full documentary about how party hats went from worthless junk to one of the most coveted items in the game, and the very bumpy path they took to get there.